39 cents won't buy much. Waste a good coin.
She spent 39 of her last 43 cents on 61 chickens that looked too thin to survive another week. Every person standing outside Gideon Pike's feed store in Red Willow Valley watched her make the bargain. They watched the broken cage being dragged from the shade of an old freight wagon. They watched the birds crowd weakly against one another, their feathers dull, their combs pale, their bodies so narrow that the bones beneath their wings seemed sharp enough to cut through the skin. Some of the hens had bare patches along their backs. Several remained crouched on the floorboards because standing appeared to require more strength than they possessed. Not one of them had laid an egg in almost 2 months. And when Evelyn Hartwell counted out her coins, the people of Red Willow Valley laughed. It was not the hard laughter of people wishing her harm. It was the weary laughter of ranchers who had seen hunger turn sensible people toward desperate bargains. It was the laughter of women who knew precisely how much flour 39 cents could purchase and how many meals a widow might stretch from it. It was the laughter of children who had never learned that what looked foolish from a distance might look very different when examined closely. Evelyn was 29 years old, widowed for nearly 2 years, and living alone on a narrow homestead at the northern edge of the valley. She had come into town that morning to buy flour. The flour barrel at home had been scraped nearly clean, and she had spent breakfast stirring the last handful into hot water with a pinch of salt, pretending the result was porridge. She had not planned to buy chickens. She had not even planned to stop outside Gideon Pike's store. But she stopped, and that was where the story changed. Gideon stood beside the cage with his sleeves rolled to his elbows and a look of deep embarrassment on his weathered face. He was 61, broad through the chest despite his age, with white hair that always appeared to have been pushed backward by the wind. He had owned the feed store for almost 20 years, and he disliked selling anything he could not recommend honestly. These came from the abandoned Danner claim, he explained when Evelyn asked about them. Family left for Oregon 3 weeks ago. Owed me for grain, so I took the birds. Thought I could bring them around. He looked into the cage. I was wrong. A few men near the hitching rail chuckled. Gideon ignored them. They are eating more feed than they are worth, he continued, and they are not laying. Not a single egg. I cannot keep throwing grain into an empty bucket. Evelyn stepped closer. The smell reached her first. Dry dust, old droppings, sour feathers, and the faint, sharp scent of birds that had lived too long in a crowded place. One hen lifted her head when Evelyn approached, but the others barely moved. How many? Evelyn asked. 61. How much? Gideon hesitated. He knew why she had come into town. Everyone knew. Red Willow Valley was the kind of place where a widow's flour tin could become public knowledge before she reached the store. 39 cents for the whole lot, he said finally, cage included. Someone behind Evelyn gave a low whistle. Gideon frowned toward the sound. I am not cheating her, he said. Nobody had accused him aloud, but several faces had. Evelyn crouched beside the wagon cage and looked through the warped slats. She did not look quickly. That was the first thing people misunderstood about Evelyn Hartwell. Her silence was often mistaken for hesitation, when in truth, silence was where she did her clearest work. She studied the birds' eyes. She watched their breathing. She noticed which hens shifted away when another moved too close and which ones had stopped defending their space entirely. She saw a narrow red hen in the back corner lift her head twice, slowly, whenever the cage door rattled. She noticed that the birds were weak but not frantic. That mattered. Starving animals often became chaotic. They fought. They pecked. They wasted what strength they had trying to protect scraps from one another. These birds were quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but waiting. Evelyn reached 2 fingers through the slats. The narrow red hen studied her hand, then stepped forward and touched the tip of one finger with her beak. They are calm, Evelyn said. Gideon looked puzzled. They are exhausted. Some are, she replied, but not all. She stood. The people gathered outside the store shifted closer, sensing that a decision was approaching. Evelyn opened the small cloth purse tied beneath her shawl and poured the coins into her palm. 4 dimes and 3 pennies. Everything she had until the next small payment came from mending shirts for the boarding house. She counted 39 cents into Gideon's hand. The laughter began before the last coin left her fingers. A boy near the water trough called out, "Better name them before they die." His mother pulled him back by the shoulder, though she was smiling too. Gideon stared down at the money. "You need flour," he said quietly. "I know. I can give you the birds and keep part of this." "No, Evelyn. If I take them," she said, "I pay what we agreed." Gideon's mouth tightened. He looked as though he wanted to argue, but he also knew her well enough to understand that argument would only delay the inevitable. He closed his fist around the coins. "All right," he said, "but I will lend you the handcart." The cage was too large for the cart, so Gideon helped transfer the hens into 2 wooden produce crates and 1 old grain box with holes cut along its sides. The birds protested weakly, though not enough to reassure anyone. By the time Evelyn tied the boxes down, nearly everyone along the main street had heard what she had done. She had bought 61 starving chickens with flour money. By the time she began pushing the cart home, the story had already grown larger than the truth. Some said she had paid 50 cents. Some said the birds carried fever. Some said grief had finally unsettled her mind. The road from town to Evelyn's homestead crossed open grassland streaked with late spring green. Snow still clung to the far blue shoulders of the mountains, but the valley itself had begun to soften. Cottonwood buds were opening along the creek. Meadowlarks called from fence posts. The wheels of the handcart bumped through ruts hardened by winter. The chickens made almost no sound. Evelyn pushed slowly, stopping twice to check the boxes. At the first bend in the road, she passed Nathan Reed repairing a gate near his cattle pasture. Nathan was 34, tall, sun-browned, and incapable of keeping an opinion to himself when he believed it might be useful. He looked at the crates, then he looked at Evelyn. "Those Pike's birds?" "Yes." "All of them?" "Yes." Nathan rested both forearms on the gate. "What did you pay?" 39 cents. His eyebrows rose. "You should have bought flour." Evelyn adjusted her grip on the cart handle. "I can still grow food," she said. Nathan glanced at the weak birds. "You cannot grow another chance." Evelyn looked at him then. "That is exactly why I bought them." She continued walking before he could answer. The words stayed with her because they reminded her of another voice, older and softer, carried from a childhood much farther east. Her grandmother, Beatrice Vale, had kept chickens through winters so cold that water froze inside the kitchen overnight. Beatrice had never owned more land than she could walk across in 10 minutes. But women came from miles around to ask how her hens remained healthy when other flocks stopped laying or died. She had taught Evelyn that there was no such thing as simply feeding the flock. "You feed the bird in front of you," she used to say. Some birds ate quickly. Some waited. Some ruled the feeding ground. Some surrendered before they began. If every bird received the same feed in the same place at the same time, the strongest often grew stronger while the quiet ones starved in plain sight. Beatrice had taught her to watch the order in which hens approached water, to notice who slept near the doorway and who hid behind the nesting boxes, to separate fear from illness, weakness from laziness, and injury from temperament. "Animals tell you what is wrong," she would say. "The trouble is that most people decide the answer before they listen." Evelyn had carried those lessons west with her. She had used them with milk cows, with a lame mule, and once with a nervous horse that belonged to her late husband, Daniel. Daniel had believed in routines. Not rigid routines, peaceful ones. Healthy animals begin with peaceful days. He had told her during their first winter in Red Willow Valley. Same voice, same hands, same hour. They learned the world is safe. His death had broken every routine in her life. A logging accident took him before noon one September day, and by evening, Evelyn had inherited a homestead, a debt, and a silence so large that she sometimes felt she was walking through it rather than living. For nearly 2 years, she had survived by repairing harnesses, sewing, planting vegetables, and refusing to sell the last acres Daniel had worked to claim. She had learned how quickly a widow's quiet struggle became entertainment for people who were relieved it belonged to someone else. Now, she pushed 61 starving chickens toward that same homestead while the valley watched. The old poultry shed behind her house had not been used since Daniel died. Its roof sagged slightly on the eastern side, and weeds grew waist-high around the door. Evelyn spent the afternoon clearing it. She did not release the chickens together. Instead, she carried each bird from the crates, one at a time. She checked its breastbone, feet, feathers, eyes, crop, and breathing. Then she placed it into one of 5 pens she built from old fencing, apple crates, and split boards. The strongest birds went into the first, the quiet birds went into the second, the aggressive feeders went into the third. Those with damaged feathers went into a dry ash pen. The weakest went into the smallest enclosure near the house, where she could watch them through the kitchen window. Lucy Garner, the 17-year-old daughter of a nearby ranch hand, arrived near sunset carrying a basket of laundry for mending. She stood in the doorway watching Evelyn separate the birds. "Why are you putting them apart?" Lucy asked. "So they can stop becoming each other's problem." Lucy considered that. "Everyone in town says they will die. Some may. And the others?" Evelyn placed the narrow red hen into the quiet pen. The bird stood unsteadily, looked around, and then began pecking at a shallow bowl of soaked grain. "The others," Evelyn said, "have not told me yet." By nightfall, every chicken had water, a little food, and enough room to stand without being pushed aside. From the road, the separate pens looked absurd. A patchwork of crooked boards, old baskets, and rope divisions surrounding birds that appeared scarcely alive. Nathan Reed rode past at dusk and slowed his horse long enough to stare. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The expression on his face carried the same thought held by most of Red Willow Valley. Evelyn Hartwell had spent her flour money on 61 starving chickens and then divided them as though each one were worth studying. People called it foolishness. Evelyn called it the first day. The first morning began before sunrise. The valley still slept beneath a pale blue sky when Evelyn Hartwell stepped outside carrying 2 wooden buckets, one filled with warm water and the other with grain she had soaked overnight until every kernel had softened. A light frost clung to the grass despite the season, and the breath leaving her mouth drifted across the yard in thin white clouds. She did not hurry. There was no sense beginning a day by rushing frightened animals. Instead, she walked slowly through each pen, saying nothing at first, allowing the birds to become accustomed to her footsteps. Her grandmother had once told her that every flock learned a person's rhythm before it learned their voice. If the rhythm was calm, the flock would follow. The strongest hens noticed her immediately. They gathered near the gate, necks stretching, hungry eyes fixed on the bucket. The weakest remained where they had settled during the night. They watched but did not move. That alone confirmed what Evelyn had suspected. They were not refusing food, they had simply learned they would never reach it before the stronger birds did. She began with the smallest pen. Instead of scattering grain across the ground, she knelt and placed tiny handfuls only inches from each bird. Several hens hesitated. One looked toward the neighboring pen before lowering her head to eat. "There you are," Evelyn whispered. "You were hungry all along." By the time she reached the largest pen, the stronger birds had become impatient enough to protest loudly. They scratched at the dirt, hopped against the fence, and competed for every handful she offered. Lucy Garner arrived just after sunrise carrying a basket of fresh dandelion leaves. "I asked Mother if I could help," she said shyly. "She said I ought to learn something useful if you're willing." Evelyn smiled. "Then you'll begin by watching." Lucy looked surprised. "Not feeding, watching first." Together they stood beside the largest enclosure. "What do you see?" Evelyn asked. Lucy studied the flock. "They're hungry." "They are. What else?" The girl frowned. "They're pushing. Keep watching." Several minutes passed before Lucy pointed. "Those three always reach the grain first." "They do. And those little gray hens keep backing away." Evelyn nodded. "Animals create habits the same way people do. If one bird wins every meal for a month, she'll expect to win forever. The others stop trying long before they're truly beaten." Lucy looked thoughtful. "So they aren't starving because there's no food, they're starving because they're losing." For the rest of the morning they rearranged the pens. Not randomly, carefully. The bold birds remained together. The timid birds stayed where they could eat without competition. The injured birds received softer bedding made from dry meadow grass instead of packed dirt. By afternoon, every chicken had eaten more than it had the day before. Not much more, but enough. That evening, Evelyn scratched a small chart onto a smooth pine board with a piece of charcoal. Instead of writing names, she drew tiny marks representing each pen. Morning feed, midday water, evening grain, strong, quiet, recovering, young. She hung the board beside the shed door. Lucy tilted her head. "You remember all that already." "I do. So why write it down?" "Because memory grows tired." She tapped the board gently. "But wood forgets nothing." The days settled into a rhythm. Sunrise, water, observation, feed, repair fences, garden work, another round of feeding. Quiet watching before dusk. Some mornings felt as though nothing had changed. Other mornings brought tiny victories, so small another person would have walked past them. One gray hen began scratching at loose dirt instead of sitting still. Another stretched both wings fully for the first time. A black rooster that had refused to crow suddenly greeted dawn with a rough, broken call that sounded more determined than strong. Lucy celebrated each little improvement. Evelyn simply nodded and made another mark on the board. "If we cheer too early," she said, "we stop paying attention." During the second week, Nathan Reed rode past again. He leaned against the fence watching Evelyn carry fresh water from the pump. "I hear you've become the chicken doctor." "I've become a woman carrying water," he laughed. "How many have died?" "7. His smile widened slightly. "I thought it'd be more." "So did I." He looked toward the birds. "They still look miserable." "They're tired." "Same thing." "No." Evelyn met his eyes. "Tired things recover." She carried the water inside without another word. Nathan watched a little longer before riding away. He could not explain why he kept slowing his horse every time he passed her place. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps he simply wanted to know how long impossible ideas could survive. By the middle of June, 54 chickens remained. 7 had died despite every effort. Each one saddened Evelyn. Each one also taught her something. The birds that died had all shared one habit. They stopped drinking before they stopped eating. She moved the water troughs closer to the weaker pens. She shaded them with old fence boards so the water remained cooler through the afternoon. Within days, the remaining birds drank more steadily. Lucy noticed it first. They aren't crowding the water anymore. They don't need to. Why? They trust it'll still be there. The girl smiled. "I never thought chickens could trust." "They trust every day," Evelyn replied. "They trust the sun will rise. They trust the roost will hold. We simply have to earn the rest." Summer settled over Red Willow Valley with bright mornings and warm evenings scented by clover blossoms. The chickens began exploring their small yards instead of huddling together. Feathers slowly returned. Comb color deepened from pale pink to healthy red. Their eyes changed most of all. When Evelyn first brought them home, nearly every bird had looked downward. Now they watched everything. Lucy laughed one afternoon when a young hen stole the ribbon from her bonnet and sprinted across the yard. I suppose that's a good sign. It is. How do you know? Sick birds don't waste energy on mischief. Near the end of June, Evelyn entered the shed before sunrise and stopped. One brown hen sat perfectly still inside a nesting box. She remained there even after Evelyn scattered grain. The woman waited quietly. Several minutes later, the hen stood. A single egg rested beneath her. Small, warm, perfect. Evelyn picked it up with both hands. She turned it slowly in the morning light. Lucy arrived moments later carrying fresh greens. She found Evelyn still standing there. What happened? Without speaking, Evelyn opened her palm. Lucy's eyes grew wide. The first one. Neither woman celebrated loudly. Instead, Evelyn carried the egg into the house and placed it carefully in a small wooden bowl beside the window. It remained there all day, not to sell, not to eat, simply to remind herself that recovery often arrived quietly. 3 days later, there were 4 eggs. A week after that, there were 11. By the middle of July, the flock produced nearly 2 dozen each week. Something about them looked different. The shells felt thicker. The yolks glowed a rich golden orange unlike any Evelyn remembered seeing. She cooked one for herself. The flavor surprised her. It tasted cleaner, fuller, as though the birds had gathered the valley itself into each shell. She said nothing to anyone. Not yet. She wanted proof before she believed her own senses. Word still spread. Children passing the homestead counted chickens now scratching confidently through the grass. Nathan Reed noticed the stronger feathers. Gideon Pike admitted to himself that perhaps selling the flock had not been the mistake everyone claimed. Then one Saturday morning, a wagon stopped outside Evelyn's gate. Martha Hale climbed down carrying an empty basket. She was known throughout Red Willow Valley for speaking plainly and wasting neither compliments nor criticism. "I hear you've got eggs," she said. "A few. I'd like 1 dozen. Evelyn hesitated. "They're not cheap. I'm not buying cheap." She filled the basket carefully. Martha paid without bargaining. Before climbing back into her wagon, she looked across the yard where the once starving chickens scratched peacefully beneath the summer sun. "I've been raising hens for 30 years," she said. "I've never seen birds recover like these." Evelyn simply smiled. "They haven't finished surprising me either." As the wagon disappeared down the dusty road, Lucy looked toward the shrinking basket of eggs. "Do you think she'll come back?" Evelyn watched the flock spread calmly through the pasture, every bird finding its own place without fighting. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "I believe she'll bring someone with her." By the first week of August, the road leading past Evelyn Hartwell's homestead looked different, not because anyone had repaired it. The wagon ruts were still deep, dust still drifted across the prairie whenever the wind changed direction. The split-rail fences still leaned slightly where winter frost had pushed them out of line. The difference was the traffic. Where once only neighbors passed without stopping, now wagons slowed almost every morning. Sometimes someone wanted eggs. Sometimes they wanted to see the chickens. More often than not, they wanted answers. Evelyn discovered there was a difference between people who laughed at success from far away and people who stood close enough to witness it. Distance made mockery easy. Evidence made it difficult. The first person to admit being wrong was Ezra Boone. He arrived one warm morning carrying 2 heavy sacks of cracked corn balanced across his wagon seat. Evelyn looked up from cleaning the nesting boxes as he climbed down. "I didn't order feed, I know. You'll need it before long." She brushed straw from her apron. You don't have to give me anything. Ezra looked toward the flock spreading across the pasture. They barely resembled the birds he had sold her 3 months earlier. Feathers shone bronze and black beneath the summer sun. The birds walked with steady confidence instead of dragging themselves across the ground. Even their voices sounded different. Strong, content. "I owe you an apology," Ezra finally said. "You don't owe me anything. I sold you those birds because I thought they were finished. You believed what everyone believed. I should have looked closer." Evelyn smiled gently. "So should everyone." Ezra shifted awkwardly. "You know what bothers me most." "What?" "I never actually watched them." He looked toward the chickens again. "I only counted what they were costing me." Evelyn rested both hands on the fence. "My grandmother used to say, 'Numbers tell you how much you've lost.'" She paused. "But watching tells you what can still be saved." Ezra nodded slowly. "I'll remember that." He left the feed anyway, not as charity, as respect. 2 days later, Martha Hale returned exactly as Evelyn predicted. Only this time she did not come alone. 3 ranch wives climbed from the wagon carrying empty baskets. None of them smiled much. They wore the expressions of practical women unwilling to be impressed until evidence forced the matter. Martha placed a dozen eggs onto the porch rail. "I brought these back." Lucy looked horrified. "Were they bad?" Martha laughed. "No, they were the best eggs my family has eaten in 20 years. She pointed toward the basket. "I brought the shells too." The women laughed quietly. Martha picked up one shell. It didn't crack the way ordinary shells do. She broke it gently between her fingers. The pieces remained thick and firm. "My husband noticed before I did." She looked directly at Evelyn. "What are you feeding those birds?" "Nothing unusual." "Then what's different?" Evelyn considered the question. "I feed them after I understand them." One of the women frowned. "I don't follow. I don't feed every chicken the same." Silence settled over the porch. "I watch. I separate. I adjust. The weak don't compete with the strong. The frightened don't eat beside the bullies. The older hens rest more. The younger birds move farther. The food matters, but the routine matters more." The women exchanged uncertain glances. None of it sounded complicated. That somehow made it harder to believe. Martha picked up another egg. "May we see the flock?" For nearly an hour, Evelyn walked them through each pen. She explained nothing dramatically. She simply pointed. "Those 3 always eat first, so I feed them last." She gestured toward another enclosure. "Those hens stop laying whenever they're startled, so their nesting boxes stay farther from the gate." Lucy noticed something. "You don't force anything." Evelyn smiled. "No, I remove what keeps them from doing it themselves." Martha remained unusually quiet. Before leaving, she touched one of the weathered fence posts thoughtfully. "I've raised chickens 33 years. I've always treated them like one flock." She looked toward Evelyn. "You treat them like 61 different stories." Evelyn laughed softly. "I suppose I do." That afternoon, Ben Carter rode through the gate. Unlike the others, he did not pretend he was merely passing by. He removed his hat immediately. "I owe you something." "You don't owe me." I laughed. "You did. I told half the valley you'd be lucky if 5 birds survived." "You weren't alone." Ben looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I've got 200 laying hens. They're healthy enough, but production's dropping every summer." He hesitated. "I wondered." He stopped. Evelyn rescued him. "You'd like me to look at them?" "If you're willing." She glanced toward Lucy. "What do you think?" Lucy smiled. "I think we should bring the notebook." Ben frowned. "Notebook?" Evelyn carried out a thick ledger bound with worn leather. Every page contained careful observations: feed changes, weather, behavior, egg counts, molting patterns, water consumption, sleeping habits. Lucy handed it to Ben. He opened several pages. "You wrote all this?" "Every day." "For 3 months?" "For much longer than that." Ben looked confused. "I thought farming meant hard work." It does. I never knew it meant this much writing. Evelyn smiled. The writing is part of the work. The following morning she visited Ben's ranch. His flock looked healthy at first glance. Most people would have stopped there. Evelyn didn't. She watched silently for almost 40 minutes. She never touched a bird, never interrupted them, simply watched. Finally she asked one question. When did you move the water trough? Ben blinked. Beginning of June. Why? I thought it'd keep the yard cleaner. She nodded. The birds don't. What? They're walking almost twice as far every afternoon. The weaker hens stop drinking before they're finished. The heat lowers production. Ben stared. How did you? She pointed. They've worn 2 narrow paths through the grass. They're telling you. You just weren't listening. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally Ben laughed. I've owned these birds 3 years. You've known them 40 minutes. You already know them better than I do. I only watched. 3 weeks later Ben's production began climbing again. He told everyone, not loudly, simply honestly. That honesty traveled farther than any advertisement ever could. By the end of August something remarkable happened. Every Saturday morning wagons formed a line outside Evelyn's gate before sunrise. Some came for eggs. Some came for advice. Some simply wanted to see whether the stories were true. Lucy began keeping track. 12 wagons today, the next week, 18, then 24. Evelyn refused to rush. Each customer received the same careful attention. No one left without understanding why the eggs tasted different. No one left believing it was luck. One evening Lucy counted the empty baskets stacked beside the porch. I never thought chickens could change someone's whole life. Evelyn looked toward the pasture where the flock settled beneath the orange glow of sunset. It wasn't the chickens. What was it? The attention. Lucy frowned. I don't understand. Evelyn closed the notebook. People spend their lives looking. Very few spend time seeing. She glanced across the valley. Farmhouses glowed beneath the fading light. Smoke rose from distant chimneys. Children laughed somewhere beyond the creek. I simply decided to see. The first cool breeze of approaching autumn swept across Red Willow Valley that evening. The chickens barely noticed. Neither did Evelyn. But somewhere beyond the hills, the harvest season was beginning, and with it would come a demand for eggs unlike anything the valley had ever imagined. Without realizing it, every family in Red Willow was about to discover that the woman they once laughed at had quietly become the one person they could no longer do without. By the middle of September, Red Willow Valley had stopped asking whether Evelyn Hartwell's chickens were different. The question had become something else entirely. How many eggs were left? Every Friday before sunrise, wagons gathered outside her gate. Not dozens, hundreds of eggs were now leaving the little homestead each week, yet they were always spoken for before the baskets were even loaded. Families who had once laughed now sent their sons early, hoping to reach the front of the line. Travelers carried crates 20 and 30 miles across the territory because someone back home had heard stories about eggs with golden yolks and shells so strong they rarely cracked on rough wagon roads. Ezra Boone watched it happen with quiet amazement. His feed store, once the place where people had mocked Evelyn's purchase, had become the place where strangers stopped to ask only one question. Which road leads to the Hartwell place? One crisp September morning, Ezra rode out before the crowds arrived. He found Evelyn already awake. She was filling water buckets, while Lucy collected eggs from the nesting boxes. The flock moved peacefully through the pasture, healthy feathers shining beneath the cool autumn light. Ezra leaned against the fence. You know what folks are calling this place now? Evelyn smiled without looking up. I imagine they've invented something. They call it Egg Hill. Lucy laughed. That's not very creative. No, Ezra admitted. But everyone knows where it is. He looked across the pasture. I've lived in this valley 38 years. I've watched gold strikes fail. I've watched cattle fortunes disappear. I've watched wheat fields freeze in July, but I've never seen people travel 20 miles just to buy eggs. Neither Evelyn nor Lucy answered. Some things did not require words. The evidence stood quietly all around them. That afternoon, Ben Carter arrived carrying something wrapped in clean canvas. He laid it carefully on Evelyn's porch. She unfolded the cloth. Inside rested a beautifully crafted wooden sign. Simple, smooth. Burned neatly into the oak were 4 words. Hartwell Poultry Farm. Evelyn looked up. I can't accept this. You already have. I haven't. You accepted it the day you bought those chickens. Ben smiled. I only finished what you started. Lucy gently ran her fingers across the carved letters. It's beautiful. Ben looked toward the flock. You saved my ranch this summer. Evelyn frowned. I only moved your water trough. You taught me to watch. He laughed quietly. I've been raising chickens 15 years. I thought experience meant knowing all the answers. He shook his head. It turns out experience only matters if you're still willing to learn. The sign was raised beside the front gate before sunset. No ceremony, no speeches, just 3 neighbors lifting rough cedar posts into the ground. By the following week, everyone in the valley was giving directions the same way. Take the creek road until you see the Hartwell Poultry Farm sign. Martha Hale smiled every time she heard it. Harvest season arrived in early October. Families from neighboring settlements flooded into Red Willow Valley to trade grain, apples, wool, vegetables, and livestock. With them came new customers. Most had heard impossible stories. They expected exaggeration. Instead, they found baskets that emptied before noon. One elderly rancher cracked an egg into a skillet outside Ezra's store simply to see whether the rumors were true. People gathered around. The yolk stood high and rich like late summer butter. The white stayed firm instead of spreading across the iron. The old rancher tasted one bite, then another. He looked around the crowd. Who raised these? Someone pointed toward Evelyn. He walked over slowly. Ma'am, yes? I've eaten eggs across 5 territories. I've never tasted one like this. What do you feed them? People nearby leaned closer. Everyone expected some secret ingredient, some expensive grain, some miracle recipe. Evelyn simply smiled. I feed them what they need. The old rancher laughed. That's all? No. She looked toward the flock grazing quietly behind the fence. I also pay attention. The crowd fell silent. Someone finally asked, That's the secret? It's the beginning. She picked up one of the eggs. Healthy animals rarely become healthy by accident. They become healthy because someone notices little things before they become big things. She gently rolled the egg between her hands. My grandmother used to tell me that every living creature spends its whole life trying to explain what it needs. She looked around the crowd. The problem is, most people are too busy talking to listen. No one laughed. Not one. Several weeks later, Martha Hale organized something Evelyn never expected. She invited nearly every ranch family in the valley to the meeting hall. Evelyn assumed it was another harvest gathering. Instead, she walked inside to find long tables covered with homemade food. Fresh bread, pies, roasted vegetables, jars of preserves. Children filled the benches. Older ranchers stood along the walls. Nearly every face in Red Willow Valley seemed to be there. Evelyn immediately looked uncomfortable. Martha, what is all this? Martha stood. The room grew quiet. Last spring, she looked around at everyone. Most of us laughed. A few embarrassed smiles appeared. We laughed because we believed we understood value. She paused. We saw 61 starving chickens. We saw wasted money. We saw another widow making another desperate mistake. Martha looked toward Evelyn, but she saw something the rest of us missed. She lifted one of Evelyn's eggs for everyone to see. Not chickens, possibility. Silence settled over the room. Ben Carter stood next. When my flock started failing, she didn't charge me. She taught me. Another ranch wife stood. My hens started laying again because of her, then another, and mine. Soon voices came from every direction. Our geese survived. Our birds recovered. Our children finally had enough eggs all summer. Our ranch stayed afloat. Our winter stores are full." Lucy watched Evelyn's face. The quiet woman who hated attention now looked overwhelmed. Finally, Martha stepped forward, holding a small wooden box. Inside lay 61 polished brass tokens. Each carried a tiny engraved chicken. "We had these made." Evelyn blinked. "Why 61?" Ben answered. "So none of us ever forget the number everyone laughed at." Martha handed her the box. "You bought 61 starving chickens. But what you really gave this valley," she looked around the crowded room, "was hope that nothing should ever be judged before it's truly understood." For a long moment Evelyn could not speak. She looked at the familiar faces surrounding her, people who had laughed, people who had doubted, people who had later admitted they were wrong. Not one of them looked ashamed anymore, only grateful. Finally she spoke. "I don't deserve this," Martha smiled. "Perhaps not, but you earned it." Laughter filled the room, gentle, warm, completely different from the laughter outside Ezra Boone's store months earlier. That laughter had been built on assumption. This one was built on respect. Late that evening, after everyone had gone home, Evelyn and Lucy walked slowly back toward the homestead beneath a sky filled with brilliant autumn stars. Lucy carried the wooden box carefully in both hands. "I still can't believe all this started with 43 cents. Evelyn looked toward the dark outline of the chicken pasture. "It didn't." Lucy frowned. "It didn't? It started years earlier, when my grandmother taught me to watch before judging." She smiled softly. "The 43 cents only gave that lesson somewhere to grow." They reached the fence. The chickens had already settled for the night. A peaceful chorus of soft clucks drifted from the roosts, exactly the sound Evelyn loved most. Lucy looked toward the birds. If everyone had known what would happen, they would have bought those chickens first. Evelyn laughed. "No, they wouldn't." "Why?" "Because they weren't buying chickens, they were buying certainty." She rested one hand on the old fence post. "And certainty is usually far more expensive than opportunity." The first autumn leaves drifted across the yard, the same yard where children had laughed as she struggled home carrying a broken cage, the same porch where neighbors had told her she should have bought flour, the same pasture where 61 forgotten birds had quietly rewritten the future of an entire valley. Before going inside, Evelyn opened her worn leather notebook one final time. On the very last page she wrote only one sentence. The birds were never the miracle. Learning to truly see them was. She closed the cover gently. The valley would remember the remarkable eggs, the long wagon lines, the prosperous little poultry farm. But Evelyn Hartwell would always remember something far simpler: 61 starving chickens, 43 cents, and one decision made while everyone else was laughing. Thank you for spending this time with us in Red Willow Valley. Stories like Evelyn's remind us that the greatest opportunities often wear the disguise of impossible problems, waiting for someone patient enough to truly see them. If this story stayed with you, we'd love to know in the comments, what is something in your own life that others overlooked but you believed was still worth saving? If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for another unforgettable frontier story. Until next time, take care and keep looking for the value others walk past.